When people get onto drugs and alcohol or get onto other addictive behaviors, we have to become better at understanding it and seeing it for what it is. People go way, way, way too long, years beyond when people around them knew that they were struggling, knew that they had this problem. There's no one still confronting it, communicating with the person, having the tough conversation. Hey, I care about you. Here's what I'm seeing in your behavior. It's not a judgment. I'm not trying to put you down. I just want you to know I'm here. I was a heroin addict. I was a cocaine addict. I struggled with alcohol. I struggled in my relationships with women. I struggled with what I call codependency. Another way of putting that would be the disease of the lost self. Maybe all addiction is the disease of the lost self.
Yeah.
And it's been a quarter century now in recovery. And in that time, I've learned a lot about the things that really work, that help a person come out of that darkness of addiction into the light of recovery, and the things that don't work so well.
My goal and objective here with us having this conversation is to really define a few things for some people. It's a very complex subject. I believe it causes more human suffering than anything from my perspective. I certainly have my own experiences with it, so I get that the struggle is very real for myself and others. And I'd like to offer some guidance and some direction for people that may feel lost or confused, not only for addicts themselves, people that identify with that, people that are on the fence, and also family members. So if you could define addiction and then define recovery. What do these words even mean? And then we'll get into this.
Sure. I'm looking at addiction in very broad terms. So I define it as any behavior that you do that you continue to do despite the fact that it brings negative consequences into your life. Any behavior. So I talk about the big six: drugs, alcohol, food, so your food addictions, and eating disorders. People addictions, codependency, sex addiction. The money addictions, gambling, debting, overspending. And the big six in this day and age is, of course, technology addiction.
Right.
Those are the big six. Those are the places where we can most visibly see human beings getting tripped up around addiction. Then I speak about the four aggravations. Those are more in the realm of thought addictions: negative thinking, self-doubt, procrastination, and resentment. Now, people will argue with me. They'll say, wait a minute, Tommy, those aren't addictions. We don't crave those things. It's true we don't crave those things, but it still fits my definition of addiction. Any behavior you continue to do despite the fact that it brings a negative consequence into your life.
How did all this lead to Recovery 2.0? Because there are many different methods of recovery that people are going after. And I want you to define recovery, because recovery, what does that actually mean?
Good. When you mention the word addiction, to most people, they're going to think about drugs and alcohol. It's going to conjure up a variety of different images that we all carry about what addiction looks like when a human being is stuck with it. I want to broaden that right now. I'll tell you that my addictions started for me when I was still in my mother's womb. So my mom, who was an extraordinary woman in so many ways, she was also very stressed in many ways and struggled emotionally in many, many ways. And one of the coping mechanisms she chose was to drink alcohol and to smoke cigarettes. And so through her pregnancy with me, she drank alcohol through those 9 months, and she smoked, basically chain smoked. When I came onto this planet, that means my supply of alcohol and nicotine was all of a sudden stopped. That must have been very uncomfortable for me as an infant.
Right.
Can't remember what that felt like. But we know enough to know that there was a detoxification process that I had to go to, which was probably very traumatic. I was born into a family where there was a lot of turmoil, a sense of, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of emotional violence, there was a lot of screaming and yelling. I know that when I turned 1 year old, my parents divorced. So in that first year of my life, there was a lot of screaming and yelling. Now, one of my favorite people in the world, Gabor Mate, who has written quite a bit on the topic of addiction, he really hits home for people that addiction is coming from somewhere. It's not a random event. It doesn't happen to, out of a cipher. There's a reason why addicts behave the way that they do. And in his opinion, it comes down to trauma.
Right.
And we'll just look at trauma as a negative experience that has left an emotional residue in the body, which has not been processed through. It can be something huge like a sexual trauma or a physical trauma, or it could be something smaller like an insecurity, a sense of abandonment, some kind of sense that something's lacking from life, even if you don't know what it is. That can be very traumatic.
Right.
So the traumatized child begins to reach outside of him or herself for whatever he or she can find to create comfort and ease in the body. That's what a human being does. It's a noble pursuit. We're seeking comfort. We're seeking ease, always. It just so happens that our methods of finding ease are so destructive. So the first thing the child can get to is food. So for me, I tell people my childhood was one sugar event after the next, bouncing off the walls like a hyperactive maniac from one sugar event to the next, trying to get homework done, trying to complete tasks. I'd have a vision of what I could do when I got home on a Friday night. Sunday night came, hadn't done my homework, had been distracted all weekend, go to school on Monday morning, be behind the other kids, wonder what's wrong with me, and repeat that process over the next 12 years of my life. Always an underlying sense of anxiety, always an underlying sense that something's wrong. I was also a happy kid. I woke up on the right side of bed. I had a lot of incredible things in my childhood. I was an athlete, so sports meant a lot to me. So it's not like it's all black or all white. I grew up, but there was always this underlying sense of anxiety. Something's missing. It's like an itch that you can never quite scratch. You can never get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's like a program that just runs continuously, like an anxiety program.
It's precisely like that, and the thing about it is you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
At 13 years old, I found marijuana for the first time. When I smoked pot for the first time, it was as if I had taken the first deep breath in my life. Everything just slowed down for me. That anxiety that I'd carried in my body for all those years all of a sudden was gone. The anger that I was now feeling as a teenage kid was just gone. All of a sudden, I felt a sense of presence, a sense of ease. I was relaxed for the first time. It was such a powerful experience, and I remember thinking to myself, literally, when I was 13, I can do this. It was the first time I felt power in my life. I can do this. I can reach outside of myself. I can have this substance. I can bring it into my life, and I can change the way that I feel. An unbelievably empowering experience for me. I grew up in the time of Ronald Reagan, and his wife, Nancy Reagan, had her great slogan, just say no.
Yeah.
An unbelievable and painful simplification of a very complex issue. It just so happens that anybody who tried to get in between me and my marijuana at that point in time was going to be moved to the side of my life. I would not be dealing with them.
Oh, and I was an addict too. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Just saying no did not at all make any sense to me whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it wanted me to fight it even more.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't tell me what to do.
Well, you know, you've found something that's created a sense of ease for you. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing about marijuana and a lot of other drugs that people take is you can't tell the price you're going to pay up front. You don't pay the price. You don't see the price tag till much, much, much later. So the great saying is the chains of habit are way too light to be felt until they're too strong to be broken.
Right. And
that truly was the case for me. You know, I smoked pot religiously for 12 years. I experimented with psychedelic drugs for many, many years. I ended up getting into cocaine and ended up smoking cocaine. I know you and I have some similarities in our story around this stuff.
Right.
Ultimately, heroin addiction, and there's no point in telling anybody who's watching this what heroin addiction and cocaine addiction look like. We've all got the stories, we've got the film, the TV shows. We know the horror of a human going to that depth. You also know how a person can get sober, or maybe you don't. In this world, there's 3 ways a person gets sober. You can move onto a path of recovery by working one-on-one with a very skilled therapist. Very often that therapist is going to send you to a 12-step program. That's the second way somebody can get sober. You can walk into a 12-step meeting. You can find a sponsor, someone to take you through those 12 steps and get the support you need and experience the change that those steps promise. The third way is to go seek treatment. So you're going to an inpatient or an outpatient facility. So I did all those things. Treatment, therapy, 12 steps. And
same here.
Yeah, same, right.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm into the kitchen sink method of recovery. This thing is not to be messed around with. And so you asked, what is recovery? For a person to behave in a self-destructive way goes against the directive of being alive. Hardwired into our system is the idea that we're supposed to be thriving. So you have to get very, very far off track to begin to engage in behaviors that actually can kill you. And not just once, but to do it over and over and over and over again. We've truly lost a connection, at first with our own purpose, our own heart, our spirit, if you will, our purpose. Why are we here? How do we want our relationships to be? Mm-hmm. How do we carry ourselves in the world? There's a sense of being separate from, a sense of being disconnected from other people. Social awkwardness is a major problem. So what we've done is we've lost ourself first. So on the path of recovery, I say to people, what are you recovering? You're recovering a sense of self. You're recovering your personality. You're recovering your character. You're developing yourself as a human being. Because when you're active in addiction, that all stops. Right. That's done. And now where you're at as an addict, you're looking at loneliness. You're looking at trying to figure out how to just get through. How can I get through this day? How can I get by in life? So any thought of creativity, any thought of spontaneity, that's all gone. The addict throws that out the window because what you need more than creativity and spontaneity is you need to get through. Mm-hmm. You need to find comfort by any means necessary.
It is perceived as survival. I mean, I think the addict brain has a tendency to minimize incredible danger and maximize something that some people would be like, why are you having such a response to that? But the way that they're experiencing life is, and sometimes it feels like life or death. This uncomfortable feeling is difficult. It is suffering.
It's so complex, Joe. You know, addicts don't behave very well. They don't make it easy on themselves. One of the biggest problems is the shame that we carry. Shame for things that may have happened in our past. Shame for the ways that we've behaved on drugs or alcohol or acting out in addictive ways. Mm-hmm. We're looking for approval, and yet the very way that we're behaving is going to guarantee that we don't get that approval. So it's become, in many people's minds, a moral issue. Addicts are degenerates. Right? And everything I'm doing in my world is to try to change that viewpoint that people have. That addicts are coming from trauma. They're traumatized people. Once they get going with some momentum down that path of drug addiction or alcoholism or other addictions, the wiring in the brain is literally changing. And that's when you get into that dis-ease piece of this condition where you're so far from a sense of ease and your brain has been wired in such a way that you'll react the same way over and over again to stressors. You'll go back to your drug of choice. You'll go back to that behavior of choice because the brain is set to do that. So recovery is all about changing the neural pathways, reconfiguring, repatterning, reestablishing a pathway to health and wellness.
Yeah. Well, I actually have thought about this a lot related to why when the intellectual part of my brain sees that I'm driving down a road that's going nowhere, but I am drawn to drive there anyway. It's like the addict brain does not seek harmony, it seeks chaos. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a toxic food seems to be the thing that is most nourishing and appealing at the moment, even in many cases when you're aware of it. Mm-hmm. So for someone watching this, how do you first get them to see that, yes, I have this, or I'm experiencing this? What are some of the signs? I mean, you've talked about it, obviously, but I want to get...
The number one sign for anybody who's asking themselves, do I have a problem? Do I have a problem with this? Whatever this is. The number one sign is you're doing a behavior consciously when you know you don't want to.
Right. In some cases, you may want to, but the consequences of it are still destructive. They're going to make your life unmanageable. They're going to screw things up. They can put you in physical, legal, all kinds of risk, but you're driven to do it anyway. It's that craving brain.
Yes. Of course, they talk about at the beginning when, like marijuana for me at the beginning, it served a purpose.
Same here.
Right. We know that marijuana calms the hyperactive brain. That's a medical fact. People like me really needed that. The question is, how can someone like me find an activity, some way to engage in the world that brings about the same effect without that long-term consequence, right? So short-term gain, long-term loss, that's sort of the hallmark of the addict. How can we create a situation where we're making decisions that have short-term gain for us, also long-term gain? That's a shift in consciousness. That's a big shift for a person to take. When you're stuck in addiction, you're thinking a lot about the substance or the behavior. You may be ready to change or thinking about changing when you're asking yourself questions like, isn't this what everyone does? You know, you're already in that process of, wow, I really am addicted. I can't stop thinking about this thing. It's on my mind way too much. Normal people, they're not asking themselves these questions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you get up in your head and you spend a lot of time there thinking about your drug of choice, thinking about whether you should be doing it or not, that's really a telltale sign that maybe your heart is asking you to move forward to another behavior.
Yeah, totally. Well, what I have found, like, there was a point in my life when the worst was when I was 18 years old, where I would literally wake up to get high, and I would get high to go to bed. I would take drugs to literally come down from the drugs that I was on, and when I was up in the morning feeling like crap, I would be getting high again in order to try to function throughout the day. And my mindset during that period of time was everyone got high. It was hard for me to imagine that there were other people. That's how disconnected I was from reality, is that I thought everyone did drugs. And
Didn't everyone?
I mean, I'll tell you though, you tend to find relationships that also support your, there's that sort of thing. And so my worst state, I weighed 105 pounds from freebasing cocaine for 3 months. And for a male who's 5'10", 18 years old, that is skinny. I averaged around 120, 125 pounds was my normal weight, which is still thin as a rail when you're a male. But that's how bad it was. I mean, I nearly died. And I removed myself from that environment because I looked in the mirror and I looked like a skeleton, and I went and lived in a trailer in New Mexico and literally got my act together, which I'm not going to go deeply into that story. And I felt like such a degenerate, and I didn't understand it. Now, looking back and looking at my childhood, my mother dying when I was 4, being molested by a male relative, a whole variety of things that I was exposed to,
Trauma.
It makes sense. And, yeah, trauma. And when you look at people's lives, it sort of makes sense. And so our friend Gabor Mate, who we got one of his books, which is in the realm of Hungry Ghost, a great book. Everyone should read it. He says the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Why do some people experience it? Because one of my main goals, and as much as I can get this message out there, is I want to change the global conversation about how people view addicts. If you can look at them with compassion, if you can try to get a semblance of understanding for yourself, like how would you treat your own best friend? You would give them slack. And so if you have a family member, if you could at least bring a level of compassion instead of the criminal justice system treating addiction, it gets moved out of that. I mean, that's a big project, and one of the things that we're involved with, that's what I'd like to do. And I will say this, addicts are difficult individuals. They lie, they cheat, they steal. There's all kinds of things that an addict can do. So I wanted to ask you, how does one bring a level of compassion and kindness to yourself if you're littered in shame, littered in isolation, thinking you're the only person in the world that does this? I do believe a lot of lines that I've heard in 12-step groups, you're as sick as your secrets and stuff like that. But how do you bring some level of compassion and understanding to yourself or to a family member or a friend or an employee or someone in your life that is dealing with this?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is it has to do with understanding. You have to understand what you're dealing with. The word compassion is a wonderful word, and if we break it up, so passion really means suffering. Compassion really means common suffering. If you're working with another person who's in the middle of this issue, you literally have to try to understand, have to share suffering with them to understand what it is that they're going through. Now, dealing with an addict is a very difficult thing. You have to set very, very strong boundaries. Otherwise, the addict will tend to manipulate you and run over you. So a very difficult thing to do. And my rule for dealing with somebody who's struggling with this issue is I never do it alone. I'm 25 years down the road of this problem. I've worked with thousands and thousands of people. I never approach an addict in active addiction by myself. So I get professional help, or I go with a couple of my homies. And if we're going to talk to somebody and try to, put up a mirror so they can understand what they're going through without any judgment, that's very important, is not judging them. I need to go with somebody. In terms of the piece of releasing shame, oneself, it's simple, and yet it's one of the hardest things to do. You have to come into community. You cannot be alone with this thing called addiction. If you are alone with this thing called addiction, you will pay a severe, severe price until you are able to come into community and let people in to understand what's been going on with you. You said it best. You're only as sick as your secrets. There is a process known as the 12 steps. It saved my life. I'd be the first to say there's things missing from the system, but a very, very powerful process for lifting a person out of addiction and into recovery. Right. Gives you a great foundation from which an incredible life can take place. But the release of shame it's kind of impossible to release it unto yourself, because your mind is working against you at that point. Your mind is drumming up all the reasons why you should be ashamed of yourself, remembering all the horrible things that you've done, remembering the situation you find yourself in. If you don't get love and support from another human being, I just don't know how recovery takes place.
Yeah, and let's speak to this for a minute, because it's so interesting, the time that we're actually doing this. I just had a dear friend in town, and I took her to her first AA meeting a couple days ago, and she sent me a text today, we were driving together, that she's attending her second 12-step meeting.
Awesome.
And she's an atheist. She cannot find any relationship to God. She was sort of like, but this AA thing, isn't everyone really religious? And all the objections that everyone has heard. and so, of course, I said, look, there's a line they'll say in there, take what you like and leave the rest. But the point is, hope heals. And you want to go to a place where there's people that believe in you more than you believe in yourself in some cases. And do your best to not go in there with judgment. It's the most accessible sort of thing worldwide. There's a lot of things that I can find fault in. And there's a ton of people that say 12 steps doesn't work. And I always try to remind people it's not an attendance program, it's a step program. Any more than if you go to a gym and join a gym, you can't say gyms don't work unless you go in and sit on a weight bench and you don't lift the weights.
Very well put.
But the point is, there are ways to interact with it, and Recovery 2.0, which is literally bringing the things that work and the things that don't, and how to interact with it. So I'd like for you to speak to the whole 12 steps, because there's so many ways that people try to discount it, but you can't deny the fact that it has helped millions of people.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you don't have any money and you don't have a lot of access to stuff, it is there, but the people are there. And the mutual suffering of all these individuals that could come together with a desire to stop addictive behaviors, they're there. So what are your thoughts on all this?
So the disclaimer here before I launch into this is to say that I'm not a representative of any 12-step fellowship. I have been through the 12 steps. They had a profound effect on my life. I did the work of the 12 steps, led by a sponsor who walked me through those steps. But I don't speak for any 12-step fellowship. It's important for me to say that. So we're in the realm of opinion and experience and subjectivity here. The 12 steps provide a pathway to a spiritual experience. What that means is, for me, is I am going to be led down a path toward my own truth. That's what I mean when I talk about a spiritual experience. I'm being led down a path towards the truth that's in my own heart. That's all it means. Now notice, I didn't use the word God at all. Now I'm not afraid of that word. If you're a religious person, that word is going to have meaning for you of a variety of different kinds. Yeah. If you're an agnostic or an atheist person, you'd probably prefer not to deal with that word. It doesn't matter. There is no requirement to believe in God of any kind to have the spiritual experience that's necessary to bring a person out of addiction and into recovery. Yes, the word God is used within the steps, and a person is given all the room they need to interpret that any way they desire. The God of your understanding could be nature. It could be, you could call it the universe or Great Spirit. You could use the group of people as your higher power, right? So there's absolutely no requirement. I tell people, do not let the God thing get in the way of your salvation. And by salvation, I'm not talking in religious terms. I'm talking about you getting to live the life that you want to live. You getting to thrive on a path where you're not using drugs and alcohol, and frankly, you're not thinking about it at all. The 12 steps provided me with a lot of work and a lot of introspection and a lot of support and love from many people. It provided me with that spiritual experience that led me to my own heart. When I got there, I understood that I had been behaving in a way that was actually against my own spirit and against my own heart. It was like a wake-up call. A massive shift happened for me. Before that shift, I was somebody that couldn't imagine getting through a day without drugs. After that shift, I really wanted this thing. And I didn't want to have drugs or alcohol in my day at all. So a massive transformation on the level of thinking had taken place for me. I completely attribute that to the work of the 12 steps. There are 3 things, however, that the 12 steps do not address. One is the body. How do we deal with this mechanism? How do we deal with stress? How do we deal with feeling physically well? Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is the breath. I'm a yoga teacher.
Right.
I work with the breath in my life. It's one of the mediums that changes my consciousness, strengthens my body, calms my mind, makes me feel naturally high when I use it well. Mm-hmm. It's just one of the greatest gifts to learn how to use the breath.
We did yoga this morning too. Did you think I was pretty good?
Oh my God, Joe. It's fantastic. It was fantastic. It's always fantastic. I never regret it. Yeah. It's a lovely feeling. The third, so body, breath, and then diet, of course. So the 12 steps, obviously the cliche is you see a bunch of people eating donuts and sugar-filled items at the meetings and smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. And that's a thing of the past more so, but it's a cliche that we really need to move beyond in 12-step society, because if you're not dealing with the body, you're not dealing with the breath, and you're not dealing with diet, you're missing 3 of the major things that are going to determine how your life unfolds.
Yeah.
So I love the 12 steps. I advocate for them. I think a person needs to approach them with an open mind. The fact that they are free, the fact that there are people there that will help you, that will walk you through those steps. There's people that will support you and give you advice when you ask for it. It's truly a remarkable society. Yeah. And I say to people who are against the 12 steps, you would not want to wake up tomorrow in a world that didn't have the 12 steps. That would be a dark, dark place at this point. Too much good has come from them. Right. We want to support them.
Yeah, and you know, there's this line that I heard Bill W., the founder of Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, Dr. Bob and Bill W., where he was quoted as saying, as alcoholics, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. And I've thought about that line a lot. And I've even said, even if you're an atheist, if you just sit and think about that, I think addicts are the most potentially spiritually aligned individuals because they're seeking some sort of connection. So if you're trying to eat your way to God, or whatever that connection is, or sex, or gambling, or internet, or work, or whatever. And I always joke with a lot of my high-level clients in Genius Network. I mean, some that are multimillionaires and driven and making lots of money and have millions of people that follow them. Workaholism is the respectable addiction. I mean, they can hide behind all of this performance addiction, this activity, and the world is getting more and more insane. Like, you know, I talk about watch what's going to happen in a few years with virtual reality addiction and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's that pursuit, that scratching the itch, trying to connect with something. So, hey, I hope you're enjoying this video, and I want to let you know that I have a new book that's come out, and if you'd like to get it absolutely free, there's a link below in the description, or you can wait till the end of this video, or you can simply go to joesfreebook.com and you can get a copy there. What happened for me, and you tell a story in here about how you were, well, early on in your life, you were in Europe and you were at a museum looking at Michelangelo or whenever it was.
The David.
Yeah. And you, in your mind, thinking, I should be admiring this, and all these people around here seem to be, this is amazing, and just, you didn't have it. You just wanted to get that, you jump out of your own skin.
That's right.
And so I find that what addiction does is it makes you pleasure deaf. Things that are normally pleasurable to some people, like walking their kids, going to a movie, maybe going to a museum, doing something, it's just not doing it for you. And that is a miserable sort of feeling to have. And so if someone is listening to this and watching this as an addict, what do they need to be prepared for in order to take this on? Because we can talk about negative consequences, but I'll tell you, a lot of my addictive behavior, sex, getting high, a lot of it was really a lot of fun. And it was enjoyable for a period of time. Now, it created misery, it created shame, it created guilt, it created a lot of struggle and suffering, and it never was enough. You know, it's the whole line about doing coke. You know, the shortest line is too much, but the biggest line is never enough. That's the challenge with sort of addiction. But there's a lot of people that think, man, getting high every day, I'm better. It makes me more creative. I can write, I can sing, I can write. How would you respond to that?
I would respond to it by saying that there is an infinite energy source around us and through us that we have decided not to tap into when we get into the realm of addiction. We equate pleasurable experiences with our drugs of choice. So that literally the only time you can really have a pleasurable experience is if the drug of choice is involved in the experience. I want to go to the movies, great, let's get high. I want to go to the museum, great, let's get high. And then what you notice, like I noticed that day in Europe, is one day you don't have your drug of choice.
Right.
Or maybe for a couple of days. And you start to see yourself without that. And you're not happy. Not only you're not happy, but you're literally, you cannot be at ease or comfortable within your own skin. If you catch it, if you're conscious enough to catch it, it's not going to sit well with you. No human being wants to live like that. And you might say to yourself, my God, I can't just be me. And beneath that is, I've never actually done the work of getting to know me. I don't actually know what me is. And for me, at 21 or 22 years old, in the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence, looking at that beautiful David statue, I was so cut off from everything. I was utterly alone. In a room filled with people, I was utterly alone. And I couldn't stand it, but I didn't know what was happening at the time. I can tell you in retrospect, I was swimming in addiction. And I had never dealt with the original pains and the original hurts of my life. And they sat there and they just festered all those years I was doing drugs. It's like stopping time in a way. You take time out of time. And then when you put the drugs and alcohol down, guess what's waiting for you? You.
Life, yep.
Life, your original pain, the core issues, all the things you put aside all those years. It's in the body, it's in the mind, it comes from trauma, it's about disconnection. The opposite of addiction, Johann Hari wrote the beautiful book, Chasing the Scream. He tells us the opposite of addiction is human connection.
Right.
So yeah, alcoholics and addicts are seekers. We're seeking connection, we're seeking oneness, we're seeking, some of us in religious terms or spiritual terms, we're seeking a connection with God. We're seeking a connection with all that is. We're seeking a sense of purpose. And we're looking in the wrong place. And the place where we're looking has terrible consequences to it. It hurts us and it hurts people around us. Until the abstinence part of our recovery can take place, until we put it down, no recovery is possible.
Yeah.
So that's where it begins.
Well, you know, I've thought of the song line, "Looking for love in all the wrong places," and that is so applicable to addiction. And you said, I can't even remember what it was, earlier today, you were saying something about deep down, here's what an addict feels like. Am I worth? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah.
Share that.
Sure. Nobody understands me. There are things that I've done and that I'm feeling that I can't let anybody else know. If they know, no one will care for me, love me, like me, be around me. If people truly knew me and what I'm capable of, they won't be around me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be alone. I've lost so much. I don't feel like I can get it back. I don't feel like there's a way for me to climb out of this hole. And so, I can't tolerate those feelings. Now, this is the dark part of addiction, right? This is when you're getting into the dark part. This is not the beginning where a teenager like me is experimenting with marijuana and having fun at the beginning.
Yeah.
We're into the darkness now, where I haven't dealt with myself, and it has caught up to me. And you have those days where you run out of drugs, or you have those days where you have a terrible argument with a family member. Anger comes out. You say things that make you further regret being alive. And it goes from one day to the next, just trying to get through. I need to get through. For other people, it's more about just this desperate loneliness and having to get beyond it. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I can feel okay is getting to my drug of choice. And by any means necessary, I will do it. By any means necessary. Nothing can stop me when I'm in that mind frame.
Right.
I will lose everything, but I don't see any other way. Mm-hmm. And the story that's underneath that is, I am not enough.
Right.
I will not be enough.
And that is a really, really difficult place to sit in. And when you're there, the level of hopelessness is incredible. I would talk around a certain addiction for many years, and I finally have thought a lot about how so many people are just not talking about this and saying, okay, I'm just going to put myself out there and have these conversations because I see it around me all the time. And when I was, this has been written about in books and stuff, but I've never said this stuff on an interview. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to kind of share some stuff because at one of my events, I actually, for the first time, shared with the group, all who are peers and very much respect me and pay me money to be there and all this stuff. And they've heard me talk about drug addiction and stuff, but I basically told a story about how when I was molested as a kid, I had a male relative that would pay me money not to say anything. And it instilled tremendous amounts of shame and disgust, and I felt like a human piece of shit and all of this sort of stuff. And my friend Pat Carnes, so I did a great interview on sex addiction. People can, do a YouTube search and watch that interview where he talks about an arousal template. When you're first introduced to something sexual, you have some sort of, that's what you end up.
Blueprint.
Being desiring or running away from whatever it is, because behavior addictions to me are very interesting. Like sex addiction sounds like, oh, that's a pervert, and in some cases people could say, yeah, it's there. Other times it could be anorexia, where you can't be sexual at all. So it's an intimacy disorder. So and I have to say, my favorite definition of intimacy that a person shared with me was, intimacy is a mutual exploration of a shared safe place. Abuse is anything that takes away the safe place, and addictions are what we do to make ourselves feel good when we don't have a safe place. Now, I didn't have any way to think about it back then, but I just never felt safe in the world after that happened. Nothing made me feel safe. It was scary all the time. And even when I started making money, even when I had friends, there was a part of me that was incredibly disconnected. And my introduction into sexuality was never that being sexual is an intimate act of love and oneness. It's something dirty. It's something that you do to get off. And I literally could not even be sexual until my mid-30s without feeling immense shame and guilt. And it's like, how do you say that to somebody? So one of the ways that it made me okay to be sexual is I would literally hire escorts. I would literally pay for sex. And I felt like, who the hell's going to understand this? I feel like, who does this sort of stuff? And then I joined this very high-profile group about 15 years ago. And there was Academy Award-winning actors and actresses and NBA players and NFL players and politicians and people that were so famous they couldn't go to a anonymous meeting because they'd all be recognized. And I'm seeing all these people that the world admires that are struggling with the same thing as me.
Turns out it's not so rare.
Exactly. And so now when I said this at one of my recent meetings, I had 6 people come up to me. Very well-known people, awesome people, doing great things in the world, saying, thank you for saying that because I struggle with that. I go to massage parlors. I am addicted to internet porn. And, it makes me realize, God, this is like so much of the human condition, but because there's so much shame attached to it, and we still have this looking at addicts as moral degenerates, how do you get out of that trap? So part of this conversation, part of even talking about this is not I'd much rather talk about marketing and all this other stuff that I do, but this to me is the important stuff because we aren't going to lead ourselves out of this mess if we're not first admitting to tell the truth.
Sure.
Like my friend Dan Sullivan says, all progress starts by telling the truth, and I think this is one of these places. So how do people get started? I mean, if there's anything that we're saying, they're like, yeah, Joe and Tommy, I kind of get it. Either I'm in this or I have a family member. What do we tell the addict? And then what do we tell the family member or someone that cares about someone? Like, what are some resources and solutions to this?
So first thing I would say is, please pick up my book, Recovery 2.0. I like to think that it's a shame buster. And what I mean by that is, it will help you to understand yourself and why you behave the way that you do without any judgment. So critically important for us. I like to say that addiction's favorite food is shame. And it's looking for it. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, there's one. Good, I can land in that host. That person's ashamed of themselves and their behavior, and they'd like to keep secrets and hold it close to their chest. So the first thing is, read this book. Get to meetings. A meeting could be a 12-step meeting. Mm-hmm. There's 12 steps for every kind of addiction, probably in your city or town. So look there. If you're in a religious congregation, find someone you can talk to, an understanding, non-judgmental person. Yoga teachers, meditation teachers, spiritual counselors. Again, it's going to come down to not being alone with this thing. If you can afford a therapist and you can work one-on-one with somebody and stay current with them week to week, that's going to be very powerful. If you can afford treatment, there are some very reputable treatment centers, and you can find one of them. If you have insurance, you can pay for it. If you have a wealthy family, they can pay for it. If you can get into inpatient treatment, wonderful. Change your environment, learn. Experience a new you. If you can't go to inpatient treatment, go to outpatient treatment. So there's many, many options, many first places to look. Also, there's so many resources on the web at recovery2.0.com or tommyrosen.com or all these places. thriveandrecovery.com is another one where you have free videos that you can access, which will really, really help catapult you onto this path. And you must understand that this is not a moral issue. You may have done reprehensible things, but you're going to have to start today to let go of the things that you've done and begin to heal from all of it. And that's how it begins. It's one day at a time. This is a process. There isn't a cure for this thing. It's an ongoing, day-to-day process that for me has become a joy. the greatest joy in my life is to be on this path. So where it's a little bit daunting and strange and difficult and painful at the beginning, it becomes an extraordinary joy in your life to be walking this path.
Isn't it interesting how many people that lives were so screwed up with addiction that after they get to that place, they say this is one of the greatest gifts of their life, which is hard for people to comprehend when they're in the middle of the suffering.
Oh yeah. To be able to say you're a grateful recovering addict or a grateful recovering alcoholic, I mean, it doesn't make sense to the normal person.
Right.
And yet nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the reasons that we are here right now is because you flew into town, and we've spent the last day and a half talking about our goals and objectives with reducing suffering for hopefully tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, hopefully one day millions of people.
Yes.
Changing the global conversation, offering education, the best forms of treatment. Me and my partner, John Butcher, are creating Artists for Addicts at the time we're doing this, where we're going to actually have a platform where we sell art, and proceeds of that art will go to fund education, put people through treatment. It's going to be big. Artistsforaddicts.com will be the location. We'll put all of that at the end of this. Genius Recovery is the main site if you want to know what me and Tommy are up to. But we've been talking about how we're going to bring this to people. So we've got many pronged approaches, and we want to get as many people involved in what it is that we're doing to, first and foremost, be incredibly helpful and find the latest and best ways to assist with this.
Absolutely. I just want to say a word about Artists for Addicts.
Yeah.
So you're going to be hearing about this, and this is a very exciting project. I have always sort of lamented the fact that when people come into recovery, if you go online and you look at the images that are associated with recovery, it's very dark. It's very bleak. It's sort of like all of a sudden you're in this like hospital environment. You're in a doctor's office or you're in a treatment center. And all of that is not too exciting.
Right.
Artists for Addicts is really going to change the face, the outward face of recovery in the most exciting way. And I'm excited. I'm so excited to be even peripherally involved in this project. It's so exciting.
Right.
And the imagery and the recasting of what recovery is all about, this joyful, incredible process of connectivity, it's coming to you, and it's going to be powerful, and it's going to be about art, and it's going to be about music, and you're going to get it. I know you're going to get it. So I'm just so excited for what Joe's up to, and I'm excited to support it at every level.
Yeah, thank you. Here's the cool thing. I mean, it's amazing how when you get to a certain point, how your biggest angst and the biggest stress and biggest suffering can actually bring people together to just really want to not only take better care of themselves, but take care of other people. Now, we have one big challenge too. There's been a war on drugs when actually it's more been a war on addicts, because the drugs and the addictions are a symptom of a far deeper problem, which is disconnection and trauma. And so those just happen to be the ways that you scratch the itch. What I'll say is, like, if you feel like crap, if you feel like shit, if you're depressed, if you're anxiety ridden, if you're lonely, if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're resentful, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to feel those bad, negative emotions, however you want to perceive it. The challenge is the way you go about scratching the itch. And so the itch exists, the pain, like, again, to quote Gabor, it's not why the addiction, but why the pain. Yes. So when you have this war on drugs, which is kind of interesting because the amount of legal drugs that are killing people and people are overdosing from is insane right now. And the United States, as an example, is a country where I believe 10% of Americans are on some sort of antidepressant. I mean, people eat drugs like candy, legal and illegal. And so what are your thoughts on the war on drugs? Because that whole thing people would be really well served to read Johann Hari's book, Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs. I can't imagine any rational human being reading that, whatever your views are on Johann Hari, reading that and not seeing that, this is just not working. But I'd like to get your perspective.
Sure. The war on drugs is a miserable failure that attacked inappropriately and mistakenly created the very thing that it was trying to destroy. Our prison population has exploded. We have 25% of the world's prison population. 5 or 6 times what we should have for our per capita population. Pain, suffering, I mean more trauma inflicted upon people who are already traumatized, not getting to the root of the problem, but just trying to beat it out of people with violence and incarceration. Hasn't worked. It's been a financial failure. It's been a societal failure. And now we're here in the middle of the worst opioid epidemic in our country's history. In 2014, more people died from prescription drug overdose than in car accidents. 2014, we lost 46,000 plus people to prescription drug overdose. These are not just people that have come from lifetimes of addiction, but these are people who might have gotten in a car accident, might have had a traumatic injury of some kind, went into the hospital, got prescribed OxyContin, ran out of their prescription for OxyContin, and ended up going onto the street to find heroin because they had become addicted.
Right.
And then it later on ended up dying. This is an epic problem beyond what I think we can understand. I can explain it very simply. In 1995, the FDA approved the use of OxyContin for use for chronic pain. It was meant to be used for end-of-life scenarios and extreme pain scenarios because it was it had a 12-hour activation period. It would keep you out of pain for 12 hours. What they very quickly found was that 12 hours diminished to 8 and then to 6 and even lower than that because people started to develop a very strong tolerance to it. Rather than letting people know that that was happening, they said just prescribe more of it. 20 years later, we sit in the middle of this problem. Yeah. I truly believe that the decisions of some of the policymakers in this country, some of the governmental organizations in this country, the FDA in particular, have sincerely contributed to this situation. As a exclamation point to that statement, in August of last year, that's August 2015, the FDA, after everything we've learned in 20 years, just approved the use of OxyContin, this very dangerous opiate, for children between 11 and 16 years old. So you have to ask yourself, do these organizations have our back or not? And if they do, why are they making these decisions, which so clearly are adding to the problem rather than being a part of the solution? If they don't have our back, then something sincerely has to change.
Right.
So we have to do things like write books, and we have to have these interviews, and we have to put these ideas out into the world. We have to get addicts to understand that their behavior is coming from somewhere, that they have to get down to causes and conditions to fix what's driving the behavior in the first place. If they can get down to those causes and conditions, they have a great chance of recovery. An addict who recovers becomes a very powerful person, enthusiastic, right, passionate, creative. So that's my greatest hope for people.
Yeah, and I have to add a couple of things on there too, because you're talking about the prison population. Now, I may have the stats wrong, but I believe there's 2.2 million people in prison in the U.S. I believe statistics, different stats look at around 90% of those people are in prison or committed their crimes or got arrested while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So
Absolutely.
You're talking most of them. These people then are put into a cage. And as Gabor Mate says, if you wanted to create the exact system that would keep people addicted, you'd create the exact prison system we have in the United States.
Exactly.
So we're taking traumatized people and putting them in a cage. And of course, Dr. Bruce Alexander, that's a whole longer discussion. He created a thing called Rats Park in the 70s and determined that if you create a better environment for rats and give them the choice of drugged water or non-drugged water, they won't drink the drugged water. So the environment has a lot to do with this. And when you were talking about the amount of people that have died, I won't have the exact dates right, but I think it was somewhere between 2008 to 2012. Because of the war on drugs in Mexico, there was over 42 or 44,000 people that were murdered by the cartel. So the war on drugs has created wars between people that are selling drugs, dealing drugs, trying to get drugs. In the viciousness, there's another 20,000 people that are missing. So we're talking over 60,000 humans because of the war on drugs. And this is a very complex sort of issue, but the approach is as long as the world continues to view drugs as the problem and we have to arrest and imprison and incarcerate people, and it's proven not to work, do you really think it's going to get any better? So yes, this conversation needs to be continued, and people need to understand really what's going on beneath the surface and bring some level of compassion here, because the criminal justice system is not equipped to handle the treatment of addicts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If we continue to treat people poorly, segregate them keep them apart from education, from opportunities, if we don't address people's problems at the societal level, anger issues, problems like bigotry, anything that divides us. Right now we have a massive divide in our country on the political level. It's become painful for people. People are angry around this topic. It used to be, okay, you're a this, I'm a that, okay, well let's discuss, okay, we disagree, fine. Not anymore. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of fear in our world, and it has to be dealt with at the level of family and at the level of the individual. When people get onto drugs and alcohol or get onto other addictive behaviors, we have to become better at understanding it and seeing it for what it is. People go way, way, way too long, years beyond when people around them knew that they were struggling, knew that they had this problem. There's no one still confronting it, communicating with the person, having the tough conversation. Hey, I care about you. Here's what I'm seeing in your behavior. It's not a judgment. I'm not trying to put you down. I just want you to know I'm here. I'm here for you. And if you ever need me, I'll be there. As long as you're interested in getting better from this thing, or you want to move on to the path of feeling better and you want to find sustainable ways to do that, I'm always going to be here for you. The door's always open. Having that conversation is so important before it's too late. Parents have a massive job on their hands. I say to parents, stay in your children's lives. Stay current with them. Set good boundaries with them. Keep them off their devices as much as possible. This is going to sound like a crazy thing for many parents. Teach your children to meditate. Teach your children how to sit still. It's so critically important. I see so many parents just defaulting. I don't know how to deal with my kids. I'm too busy. Put a device in front of them. Have them deal with that for the next couple of hours. And that becomes what the kid learns. There's so many practices that parents can get involved in, not the least of which is get your kids off of sugar-rich diets. Get them onto a diet that can actually allow them to sit still if they had the inclination to do so. Myself as a child, I wouldn't have been able to sit still if you'd put an anvil on top of my lap. Just too hyped up around sugar and food. So there's a lot of things we need to consider when we're trying to improve upon our current situation. If you're dealing with somebody in your family or a loved one, don't deal with them alone. Have at least one other person with you, and don't judge them. Come to them with love and explain, here are our boundaries. We care about you. This is what we see. We can't have this behavior in our house, but we sure would like to be there for you if you wanted to get better. It's the hardest thing to do. But those are some of my ideas. And basically the Recovery 2.0 perspective is we need community, we need a spiritual path home to our heart, and we somehow have to work out the traumas of our life, both on the verbal level and also on the soma or somatic or body level. This is the work that we have to do, and then we get to heal. And when we heal, the most extraordinary life is waiting for you. So do these things. Open your mind to a new way of thinking around addiction and recovery. Pick up this book and a lot will be explained. And then, Joe, I think you have some things to tell them about resources we can offer online.
Yeah, what I'd like you to do is go to geniusrecovery.com and we'll have a list of additional things that will be helpful to you to kind of get you into this process if you are an addict yourself, if you're lonely, if you're anxiety-ridden, if you feel hopeless. go there. We'll offer whatever we can that will be beneficial. If you're a family member, an employer, a friend that is confused, cannot understand why someone is going down a destructive path, do that. Also, one of my favorite quotes is about forgiveness is giving up the hope that one day you're going to have a better past. Whatever the past is, it's the past. What you can do in the future is very critical. I'm super happy that we're aligned in this way. Artists for Addicts will be a great place for people to engage. I had dinner with Alice Cooper a little over a month ago, the singer who's been sober for over 26 years, I believe, and he's super excited about Artists for Addicts.
And what a story.
Yeah, and he's he's got the Solid Rock Foundation here in Phoenix, Arizona, that kids can go to and have access to drums and guitars and instruments and a place to keep them in a safe environment where they can engage and have a community. So there's a lot of amazing individuals that are doing great work. And so what we're wanting to do together is bring people together and offer them hope, offer them inspiration, let them know that you are not alone, that there are things that you can do. This is a difficult thing, but what I've heard in recovery a lot of times is that if you put 10% of the effort into your recovery versus like the 100% that you put into your addiction, your life is just going to get dramatically better. So it may seem like a lot of work, but I'll tell you, being an addict is a lot of work. It's like a full-time job, and it's not a full-time job that ever has a good, happy ending. It just doesn't. And so we hope that you found what we're sharing here really useful and really valuable. And there are resources like mylifebook.com and all kinds of stuff that we'll have listed as part of the resources at geniusrecovery.com. So. Okay, I hope you found that video awesome and useful. So if you want to get a free copy of my book, I want you to click here. And if you want to watch some more videos that'll be useful and awesome, click here. Go ahead. They're over here. Do it now. Come on. Thank you. Watch them.